say you wanna watch a drama. You say you wanna watch a comedy. Well, you can watch it with your mama, or you can watch it with your daddy.
You'll even sit and watch it with your middle schooler, so you can come and talk around a water cooler. We're watching all day and all night.
Couch potatoes unite.
Whoa, whoa.
Couch potatoes unite.
Whoa, whoa. Couch potatoes unite.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the podcast entitled Couch Potatoes Unite! Which is based on a blog of the same name because it may not be a song of ice and fire, but it gets the job done. My name is Kylie and I love TV. If you feel the same, keep listening and or checking out our website, couchpotatoesunite.wordpress.com, as you're bound to find some common ground or something you like. For Couch Potatoes Unite, we're all about the wonders and unique long-form storytelling of the small screen. CPU! Hopes you've been following releases of brand new episodes of the podcast on Wednesdays, as well as new blog entries on some Tuesdays. And as always, we have several more new episodes on the way. Because the panelists and I live lives behind our podcast, the episodes are published once per week. Subscribe to the blog or the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, via Google Play, and Spotify to stay on top of brand new episodes. Episodes already published discuss a variety of shows around the water cooler, including, but not limited to, Fuller House, Westworld, The Good Place, Arrested Development, Jane the Virgin, Schitt's Creek, Doctor Who, Supernatural, and Orange is the New Black. Plus, new episodes are in the works, including revisits for American Horror Story, Grace and Frankie. We'll be launching new panels covering Mr. Robot, Charmed, Outlander, The Breaking Bad Universe, and This Is Us. And because we look back at shows now past, we'll put out some musical stops for our crazy ex-girlfriend. We'll revisit one of the all-time and most-watched classic sitcoms in MASH, and we'll consider the moral implications and quick cancellation of Dollhouse. By the way, did you know that CPU also from time to time goes live? We've been live from bunkers, comedy shows, and Comic-Cons. Plus, we're planning more live appearances and other cool stuff. So make sure you like or follow us at our Facebook page, our Twitter at CPU Podcast, our Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite, or subscribe to the blog, our YouTube channel, our Apple iTunes channel, our Stitcher Radio channel, or find us on Google Play as well as on Spotify. In the meantime, if you don't hear a show in this podcast format, fellow panelists and I still write reviews and we always seek new panelists. So if you have any interest in joining the discussion, say hello by finding us at any of those outlets I've mentioned. At the very least, stop by and leave us a thumbs up, comment, or review. We like feedback, just don't take your dragon and burninate the countryside as your feedback, because that's mean and it makes the internet mad. We can prove it. Today we're around the water cooler because our long-standing house playing the Game of Thrones, namely Kristen, Amanda, Jay, Chelsea, and Rob, have gathered together once again, one final time if you will, to take a look back at departed fantasy series Game of Thrones, which aired for 8 total seasons from 2011 to 2019 on HBO. If you aren't already aware, from time to time CPU chooses shows of all types, but usually of some fame or notoriety to reminisce about, and then consider whether or not they age gracefully, like Winterfell defending the armies of the dead, or don't hold up as well, like King's Landing when confronted by Drogon the Dragon. As such, this is another chapter of our Looking Back podcast episodes where we review a show that has been gone, either via natural end or cancellation, for some time. And today we reflect upon Game of Thrones in an episode that represents the second of our 2-part goodbye series, in which we salute the end of our watch of one of the most important cultural touchstones in TV history, for better or for worse. To remind the listener, Game of Thrones is an American fantasy drama television series created by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss for HBO. It is an adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin's series of fantasy novels. Set on the fictional continents of Westeros and Essos, Game of Thrones has several plots and a large ensemble cast, and follows several story arcs. One arc is about the Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms and follows a web of alliances and conflicts among the noble dynasties, either vying to claim the throne or fighting for independence from it. Another focuses on the last descendant of the realm's deposed ruling dynasty, who has been exiled and is plotting a return to the throne, while another story arc follows the Night's Watch, a brotherhood defending the realm against the fierce peoples and legendary creatures of the north. Previous CPU entries, both podcasts and blogs, centered on Game of Thrones, provided plot summary and recap following the principal characters among the more than 200 covered by the show. For a more detailed plot summary, or to delve into the primary characters' past season exploits, listen to prior podcast episodes or check out our other Thrones entries on the blog. If you didn't already know, you can click the floating box at the top right of the header, the picture of the couch full of TV watchers, and search for any blog entry or prior podcast episode, which is far speedier than sending Raven dragons, or apparently walking over the countryside with big armies. For now, our noble group of Game of Thrones panel has returned one final time to wax philosophic about the entity, the whole entity, known as Game of Thrones, now that we have recovered from its Iron Throne-like grip on our collective consciousness. As always, it should be noted that all of our panelists have watched all episodes of the series and will, let's face it, discuss highly sensitive plot points. So for those of you who are not caught up on Game of Thrones, first, where have you been? It's been on for forever. And second, listen at your own risk, as there are going to be major spoilers. Welcome back, panel. How are you?
Hello.
It's been such a long time since we've seen each other last.
It's been a fortnight. Minutes.
I like fortnight. Well, as we often do for these long-running ends of shows and very popular shows that we cover, we're now going to look back at all of Game of Thrones and just kind of reflect on the journey that we've taken with these 8 seasons. And this is how we do this. Obviously, you've all watched 8 seasons, all 8 seasons. What I'd like you to do is remind the listener who you are, and then you get to tell us what your interest in Game of Thrones was at 2 points, because we're looking back, of the show. How did you feel about it after you first started watching it? And that's going to go along the very first character question that I ever wrote for when we started covering Game of Thrones. You're then going to pick how you felt at the end, by the end, and you're going to use the character question we used for the season 8 episode, because those are the characters that were left. So whether your answer changes or not, you're basically looking at the whole show at this point. Not just how you felt at the end, but the whole show. How does it land for you all 8 seasons in the end? So I'm going to read the first character question. I'm not going to reread the second. If you want to know what they said, listen to season 8. Okay? Are you ready, panel?
Ready? Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So considering how you felt at the beginning, did you watch Game of Thrones because you were obsessed with it? A fanatic, one might say, like Melisandre? Did you watch it because you openly loved it and were zealous to protect the show, whatever its transgressions, as if it was your young, even if your young are dragons, and to learn lessons on how to be a ruler, so you might maintain your rightful birthright and claim to the Iron Throne like Daenerys Targaryen? That one didn't change too much, really. Did you watch it to cheer for the underdogs, the names without sigils, who scheme for the better of all, like Varys, or the better of him or herself, like Baelish, Lord Baelish, or Littlefinger? Did you watch it because you secretly loved it, like Sir Jorah Mormont loves Daenerys, or Samwise Tully loves Gilly? Tarly loves Gilly. I apparently wrote Tully. Do you watch it for the military intrigue and the mysticism, believing these two forces will allow you to claim your rightful place upon the Iron Throne, like Stannis Baratheon? Well, that's a throwback. Did you watch it because you want it all? The power, the prestige, and the honor of the Iron Throne, as well as the love of your family, minus your youngest brother, and you'll do whatever it takes to keep it, since you are also fighting against the minimization of your sex, like Cersei Lannister. Did you watch it because it's a good time with clever words, and if you are for anything, it's a good time and clever words, like Tyrion Lannister? Did you watch it because you want to stay on top of your fighting prowess? You feel otherwise useless in any game of political intrigue, but will fight for who you love, including your twin sister, with whom you bore 3 illegitimate children, like Jaime Lannister. Did you watch it because you were drawn to it, helpless and scared, along for the ride against your will, but with a morbid fascination, powerless to stop its momentum, like Sansa Stark? Did you watch it to learn how you can seek revenge against those who wronged you, like Arya Stark? You don't know why, you know nothing, like Jon Snow. Or you watched it because you are not, or didn't watch it because you are not Theon, only Reek. Reek loves nothing, only the Master Ramsay. So you don't much like this show. Why are you here again? How did you feel about Game of Thrones at the beginning using that scale and the end using the one for season 8?
I can go first.
Okay.
I'm Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
I am Tyrion. I think I've just been Tyrion the whole time. I got into the series because I had read the books. I like to read and I like fantasy genre, so it's right up my alley. So the fact that I had read the words and then they were going to put them on the screen was what really got me interested in the series. Should I do the other part as well? I mean,
Yeah.
I still stayed the same. I enjoyed the genre. I enjoyed the world building. I think in our season 8, there was a little bit with Tyrion about being not thrilled with the ending, which we discussed at length. So go back and listen to that one if you want to hear my thoughts, for brevity's sake.
Thanks, and welcome back, Amanda.
Thank you.
One final time.
My name's Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi. So I came into Game of Thrones a couple seasons in. I think I started watching it live when I think season 3 premiered. I remember hearing about it when it came out, but I was like, we'll see if it sticks around. It sounds cool, but we'll see. It stuck around, so I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I kind of binged the first 2 seasons pretty quickly, fast enough so I could start watching season 3 in real time. When I started, definitely a Tyrion, just like Amanda. I thought it was really interesting. It's cool. Loved it right away. As the season went on, or the series went on, we got to the end of the final season, I was still Tyrion, as you'll hear in our other podcast, and I was also a little bit of Davos at the end as well, with things kind of went off the rails a little bit, but it was still pretty good at the end to a degree.
Welcome back, Kristen.
Thank
a
you.
final time.
I'm Chelsea,
Hi, Chelsea.
and from the beginning, I was pretty obsessed with this show. Just in general, I don't recall another show I looked forward to as much as this one, knowing that a new episode was coming out. So definitely Melisandre in that way. Just loved the show, obsessed with everything about it from the beginning. But I have always been a Stark girl. I've always been incredibly invested in the Stark family and their storyline, and seeing how essentially Ned's death is how they, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, how they essentially, make up for his death and all the war, the warring that comes out of that. So I've always been super invested in that storyline, and to the end, still just interested in where Arya ends up, Sansa, and Jon more so than Bran. But yeah, always a Stark.
The Starks et al. Welcome back, Chelsea.
Thank you.
A final time.
This is Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Hello. I would say I start off, I'd echo what Chelsea said, more Melisandre at the beginning, very obsessed with it. I think we dove into it when it was just about to be season 3, maybe just like Kristen, so we binged the first 2 seasons. And yeah, similar, never had a show where the cliffhangers just made you have to watch the next episode, and then the time off between seasons was really well done, and I was very obsessed with it. Near the end, now that we've come to conclusion, I think it's a mix of the Davos off the rails, like Kristen said, a little lost. Maybe mix a Tormund in there well, just here for a good time, play my part, have a couple laughs along the way, and see how the story ends. But definitely an obsession show. Never felt that way about the show. Petered out a little bit at the end there, maybe just the way the storyline fell. Ships fell where they may, so to speak, but overall, brilliant television.
Welcome back, Rob. A final time.
Thank you.
I'll go last. I'm Jay.
Hi, Jay. I'll go last.
Hey. Hey.
Or the Fonz.
Hey, the Fonz.
You said hey.
I did. That's something I said. I started out with the series as a Tyrion in the sense that fantasy genre is something that I love very, very much. And I wasn't as obsessed with the books and didn't know them as well as Amanda did, but it was something I was aware of, and I just love really well put together television, and this show kind of combined the fantasy genre with just a very, very well done television show. And so it was the Tyrion with a shout out to Daenerys, just because I like to, protect and defend this sort of fantasy genre and whatnot. By the end, I felt like the effort that they were putting into the show had sort of waned, and that was something that I really enjoyed, was the effort that was being put into the show. So it was a Davos and whatnot off the rails, but I can still enjoy something even if it isn't in the highest of qualities. I don't think that those things are mutually inclusive in any way. So, it must be good and you have to like it, or it's bad and you have to not like it. So you can like things that aren't as well executed. So overall, I still love the show, but I guess by the end it was sort of like okay, it can end.
Okay. Well, welcome back, Jay, a final time. And actually, we forgot to do the disclaimers in the season 8 episode, but we will now because you made reference to Amanda. Jay and Amanda are a married couple, and Chelsea and Rob are a married couple.
That's true.
And Chris and I are just hanging out right now.
Yeah, we're hanging out.
We're hanging out with the couples. And of course, my name is Kylie. I have moderated this series, of course, and I've also participated because when I first started, I would actually do 2. I would be Melisandre. I was obsessed. One of my friends turned me on to this show. I love fantasy. Fantasy and science fiction are my 2 favorite genres, hands down. I love The Lord of the Rings. They are my favorite books. I've read them multiple times. They knew that I would love this show, and they actually acquired some of the season 1 episodes because it wasn't done airing, and basically said, no, you have to start watching this show right now. Start watching this show. And I did. And even though it took a little bit for the obsession to percolate, by the time Ned Stark met his horrific end, I was like, holy crap, am I obsessed with this show? So I'd be Melisandre. But throughout, from then on, in addition to Melisandre, I would also be Daenerys Targaryen from beginning to end. I felt in some ways like I was defending the show actually a lot more than even just in season 8. There were people that loved picking this one apart, and I thought, geez, Louise, you guys have some really high standards, and point to me another TV show that even comes close to the standards that you have, and then we'll talk. And nobody could. But that's okay. So there was a lot of that. There was some, off-putting places that maybe people had to process, but I love Daenerys. I love the dragons. I love the character. But the Daenerys thing also applies to season 8. I feel like I've had to defend the show even more since the season 8 ending that everybody has kind of alluded to. But I'm going to also give a little shout out. I'll do a reverse of Jay. I'll give a shout out to Tyrion because it is a good time with clever words. It always has been from beginning to end. The dialogue was clunkier in the last season, but it was still largely clever the whole time. And Tyrion is those, Daenerys, Tyrion, and Jon are my 3 favorite characters. And while I wouldn't be Jon at any point on the character scale, Tyrion applies here too. So that sets the stage. So you can see their transgression, their evolution, that is, as panelists, as far as how they regarded the show. And of course, you can find our other episodes to see if that actually tracks. But it sounds pretty consistent with what I know. So let's talk about the show. This is high level. We're going back. We're just thinking through the different seasons and everything that happened. What did you love about the show? What did you hate about the show? Specific or general observations? Go.
I thought casting was pretty spot on throughout the entire show.
Yeah, I think we talked earlier before we started today that I would challenge anyone to watch season 1 and get invested a little bit into the storyline, the Stark family, and see the ending of the first season and not continue watching. Just the way with Ned's head being taken off, and he was the savior. He's the one who was going to make right in the world, and then it was like, what? And that's with the first inkling. This show's gonna be a little different. It's not going to be the standard story arc, so to speak. The surprises for me throughout the seasons, the plot twists, the surprises were the best part.
Yeah, I'll agree with Rob. I hadn't read the books when I first started watching, and so I didn't know what was coming next. And when we got to the episode where Ned Stark was beheaded, I was caught off guard, just like Arya and Sansa were in the episode. I felt like they kind of mirrored my emotions a little bit. So I knew at that point, like, okay, this show is going to subvert all expectations. No one is safe. This is going to be kind of a crazy ride. And yeah, it hooked me pretty early on. Once I got past the twincest, that kind of put me off a little bit. But once I got past that and we got to Ned's beheading.
Once you got desensitized to it.
Once I got desensitized to it, yeah. Then it was just, yep, here we go. I'm in this for the long haul.
As I said before, I love the fantasy genre, and I love Lord of the Rings just like you, Kylie. But something that I don't want to say I don't like, but something that Lord of the Rings sort of lacks for me in the sense that we really just sort of follow, especially in the movies, we're following kind of the fellowship, and we follow many characters, but they're all for the most part, very important to things that are going on. And we do for the most part in Game of Thrones, but there are so many more characters in Game of Thrones. And also, we visit, the elves, and we visit these sort of things, and it's, for lack of a better word, even though there is grittiness to all fantasy worlds, Lord of the Rings is very clean. And what I like about Game of Thrones is there's this underbelly to the show, this sort of grittiness to some of the places, and to me that's something that I'm always sort of drawn to whenever I watch a show. I like things that are a little messy, that look lived in. And like, this is a fantasy world, and there's some beautiful sets and ornate things, but there's also like a dirtiness and sort of an everyman sort of value to a lot of the show that just really sort of sucks me in.
Yeah, I would add on to that. As I was reading the books and then, of course, watching it on the screen, there were moments where I loved the world building and I was all in, and then things would happen and I'd think, what is wrong with this man who wrote this story? Because some of that stuff is really messed up. So some of that was disturbing to see played out on my screen. I could have maybe done without some of that, but it does add that intensity to it where it doesn't feel safe. And I did love in the books and then, of course, the show that nobody was safe. And it was fun to, as having read the books, watch people react who were, coworkers and things who hadn't read the books but were watching the series, and they'd go, "Oh my gosh," and I'm like, "Oh, just you wait, there's worse to come."
You book readers with that phrase.
Moments like knowing that the Red Wedding was coming, things like that, where you're like, "Oh, you poor innocent souls who haven't really seen what's coming yet." I did enjoy that, and then the series did take a bit of a turn for me when we ran out of books. Because then I had to have that sense of, oh Lord, what are they going to do next feeling as well. So I did get a little bit of both of the watching this world that I really enjoyed reading about come to life, and then going into this uncharted territory, which is where everybody else had been for most of the series. It was an interesting switch, but I still enjoyed that journey.
I loved the complexity of it, which is kind of what Jay was talking about. He's talking about sort of clean and gritty and lived in. There is almost a simplicity about the Lord of the Rings. It's very linear. There are your clear heroes, your clear villains. There's only a handful of each. You know what their objectives are, and it's really you're following their journey across Middle-earth and its different continents to find the realization of what you already know their goals are going to be. We need to have a king in Gondor. We need to destroy the One Ring. Those are the main goals right there, and make sure that Sauron is defeated. Game of Thrones, at least from the outset, did not have clear goals. It was not a simple set of heroes and a set of villains. You really didn't know who they were or what their motivations were right away. You knew there was a family that you really liked, a family that you really didn't like, and some other people that came in the middle. It was fantasy, but the fantasy aspects didn't emerge right away. The first fantasy aspect we saw were the direwolves. It wasn't the dragons. The dragons didn't come till later. We saw the aspects of the White Walkers. We didn't see the White Walkers until later. So fantasy was almost an afterthought. George R.R. Martin has said that he's based the political context of the books on the Wars of the Roses out of English history, which was a very violent and bloody struggle between different families that could claim the British throne, the English throne. And you can see the seeds of that, but then it becomes so much more in the end. And that's what I really loved about it, was the complexity. The fact that I had to think. Some people like to watch TV and not think. I'm a make me think TV. I want to think. I don't want it to just be. Sometimes I do, but most of the times when I'm invested as I am or as I was in Game of Thrones, it's because I want them to make me think and to make me question and to react like Kristen was when Ned Stark gets beheaded. Like, oh crap, nobody's safe. Now what's going to happen? There's so much unknown there, and it's exciting and it's scary and it evokes feelings. And I think that Game of Thrones masterfully did that in the very first few seasons, and that was one of the things that I will always say about this show. And it's fun because I also have had people come late to the show. I used, in our season 7 episode, I talked about my mom. My sister and I have been obsessed with Game of Thrones for a long time. And we just talk about it. Chit, you know, and she's like, what is this show? I don't have HBO. What are you talking about? So she decides after all this time, just before season 8 premieres, to go through all 7 seasons of the show, which she does in 2 or 3 weeks, which for a woman of elder status is not likely going to do in this day and age. But she did it, and every time it was like, she's reacting to things like the Red Wedding. It was very funny, and I almost had that little bit of, I didn't read the books, but I knew that was coming. And let me see what you react to. I mean, there was a community that was built out of watching this show. Worldwide community. I mean, internet fodder, water cooler discussion was Game of Thrones for the better part of these 8 years. That's what I love the most about it. Now, what didn't you like so much about it? Because everybody talked about what they liked, and I think they're hedging the, what didn't I like as much? Or is it just season 8?
You mentioned, you enjoyed, the complexity of the show. Sometimes, there were so many storylines happening, so many characters to, keep track of. I still don't have everybody's name straight. So sometimes for me, it was a little hard to kind of follow just because there was so much happening. But I also, I understand, especially going through all seasons at this point, that it was necessary to do that to set up set up the ending.
So a little bit more complex than you would have preferred.
Yeah, sometimes, and certain storylines. We're going to get to this question later that I just, that went a little too long or took up too much airtime. That would have liked seeing something else. But we'll get to there.
Yeah, I agree with Chelsea. I remember at some points having to go to Wikipedia and be like, okay, who is this person again? What's the point of this? I don't really remember, especially when it was across that large break in between seasons that we had. I would just forget things or forget people and have to go to other sources and read a little bit about. Since I haven't read all the books, I've only read the first one. I felt that there were some really cool storylines that I've read about that they didn't include, and maybe it was already so complex they didn't want to add in, like Lady Stoneheart or Catelyn Stark after she gets re-risen from the dead. I always thought that would have been something really cool to see, but they chose not to include her, but they included other storylines instead. So there's some questions I have about why did they choose A and not B, and I felt like that there was some wasted potential a little bit as far as how different storylines played out and how they combined things and combined characters. Overall, I think they did the best with this super complex world that the author built for them.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the fact that one thing I really liked about the show, other than the grittiness and all that sort of stuff, is that you can tell, especially in the first few seasons, whether you liked certain storylines or whether you liked certain characters or you didn't, or and that's all natural to feel that way. But the show to me just was so it looked like so much effort and care was put into every episode. It looked very expensive to put on, with the costumes and sets and effects and all that sort of stuff. And it's not like I just need a hefty price tag in everything that I do. One of my favorite television shows is The Wire, which was much smaller of a budget, but again, there's a lot of just love and care that is put into that show, and I felt like so much love and care was put into the show, and it became such a popular and cultural phenomenon that later on I felt like they weren't putting as much care into the show, and that's sort of what I don't like. And we can say, hey, a bad Game of Thrones episode is still better than a bunch of other shows, and that's fine, or maybe it's not fine. And I don't necessarily think that you have to like a show that is well executed, or that you have to hate a show that isn't well executed. You can like whatever you like. It's art. It's subjective. Watch what you want to watch. But to me, you had this show, and they were so they set the standard that was so high that I feel like as the show went on, they put less and less effort into it, and were sort of maybe riding on hubris, or just they had some things into place that they didn't want to sort of change or sort of reinvent or top, and it sort of petered out. And I think that it's hard to maintain that sort of standard all the way through, so I don't necessarily blame them, but I think that the standard really dropped off after a while, and it's just disappointing because it was so good at the beginning.
Yeah, almost like they were writing on the fact that we have such this large fan base and they're so invested after all these years that they're just going to take what they get at the end. And yeah, I would agree with that they stopped caring as much, and that's definitely to the detriment of the story and the actors and the characters. And yeah, I would agree with that, Jay.
Either that or they were tired.
Or they had better projects to get to, or newer projects.
But they have to sense the gravity of what they were putting out there.
Well, that's it. So it's to kind of respond to the caring point. I think they cared to an extent. Maybe not as much as by the end, but I got the sense that they got tired. And what happens when you get tired is you start to think about all you want is to be done. All you want is to get over the hump. All you want is to say, yes, I put the cap on it. And I'm not excusing it. I'm just thinking that they went through and rushed it because they were ready to be done. And maybe there was a little hubris in that, like hubris, that the audience was just going to accept what they presented. But you could tell the fatigue, I think, in that last season, which is what we're kind of hinting on. Again, it is an issue with the show that I think is always going to mar its legacy, because we're talking about something that was so good, the high standard, that kind of didn't live up to its own standard by the end.
When you live through some storylines in previous seasons where it takes multiple episodes to get through these storylines, which in the end don't have a huge bearing on the outcome, where there's the High Sparrow, the Son's the Harpy, and then we're just, okay, but then huge key plot points at the end of the series are just done in a half an episode. It was tougher pill to swallow.
Anything else you want to say generally? I'll start asking you the looking back questions. Is there any season that was your favorite? We'll start with your favorite.
I don't know about seasons. Episodes for sure.
Mm-hmm. Same. What about some of those?
Heart Home for me was a good one.
Heart Home.
I think that was the first time where you really sensed the ultimate danger and just the impending doom, so to speak, and the realization of just how fast these White Walkers can be, how powerful they can be.
That waterfall of walkers coming
They
down.
came over the cliff, yeah.
And in the end, when the Night King rises everyone that was slaughtered in the battle, like what a moment.
Yep, that come at me, bro, kind of moment that he had with Jon Snow was epic.
I like, it's tough. It's tough for me to sit here because I like a lot of the moments and a lot of the stuff that isn't as this is a battle or this is a this. But I think when you think about episodes, I think that some of those battle episodes are done really, really well. One of my favorite episodes, actually, which doesn't do a lot of it's different from a lot of the other Game of Thrones episodes. It's the Battle of Blackwater, which is I think the 9th episode of season 2.
Yep.
And I love it because we don't go really to any other place. We just stay at King's Landing, and the whole, they sort of had like a flow where like we go visit Daenerys, sort of like the opening credits, right? Like we go here and then we go here and then we go to the wall and we go, but like we just stayed at Blackwater, and it made it very intense, and just that fight in the dark with the wildfire going off in the water, it's just visually really stunning, and with Joffrey there and Tyrion, like it's just I really enjoyed that episode a lot because I felt like it was slow but yet also big battle, and there was a lot of stuff in there that I thought was really well done.
Yeah, it's usually that like second to last episode of the season where we have the big battles. Those are usually some of my favorites, not all of them, and not all of them are as good, but it's typically they put their big climactic season moment in that second to last episode, and most of the time they pay off.
I think some of my favorite episodes were when villains died. I'm not that kind of person in real life, but this was a show where I was rooting for Ramsay Bolton to die a terrible death. Same thing with the Father Lannister. See, I can't remember his name.
Tywin Lannister.
Tywin Lannister getting shot on the toilet. It's very satisfying. So and then like the Battle of the Bastards was an amazing visual. And I'm not one who likes the gore and the war and all of that, but that episode and then White Walkers episode was really thrilling.
It's a tribute to the show. It wasn't just good versus evil. We learned like different levels of evil that there can be, and so you get that payoff when Joffrey's a terrible person. Oh wait, Ramsay Bolton's even worse.
Yeah.
So then you have those chances for the payoff for that day.
Yeah, Joffrey getting poisoned was amazing. I think I was clapping.
I was particularly, yes, I wanted Ramsay to die, and I was happy that Sansa got to have a little curly smile as she walked away. But the one that I cheered for was Joffrey. I was like, yeah, you're poisoned! Yeah!
Yeah. So even though Ramsay was worse, Joffrey was the one that was more satisfying to me.
And then the intrigue around it, and then payoff several seasons later. By the way,
tell Cersei it was me.
Alana Tyrell, ladies and gentlemen.
She was a treasure on that show. I loved her. But I'm a House Tyrell girl anyway.
I know.
I
I see, and it's for me. When we're talking about favorite, like the things we loved the most, this is one of the few shows that I cannot pick that because I loved so much of it. So much of it. I loved moments. One of the moments that I reflect on for some reason I'm really drawn to was when Tyrion had his moment with the 2 dragons in Essos and got to touch one of them. I don't know that I liked that whole episode as much as I liked that moment, but it was that moment. It was sort of the evolution that the next thing was coming and the next thing was coming. And yes, Hardhome and Battle of the Bastards and Blackwater, all of those were great. I loved all of those. I can't even pick apart a season that I can say, yes, this is the season that's my favorite, because they were all so good, at least to a point, in their own different ways. And that's not a cop-out on my part, because I'd pick a favorite. I usually have one. But this one is just like, I've been thinking about that, and I don't even know that I could select a moment or an episode, or yes, these are the best, because to me it was all the best for such a long time, compared to all the other things I was watching. But it's funny, because now I'm going to ask you, which season was your least favorite? And I think everybody has an answer.
For me, these questions are really hard because, like you, it all becomes one big story for me. And I'm a big picture girl. So, I never know anybody's name, but I can watch the show and I know exactly who they are, but I could not tell you their names. I'm useless in that way. Jay is helpful in remembering these things. I'm like, who's that guy again? What's his name? What? So, there are moments like Kylie said, that stand out. I mean, we all talked about season 8 and how it was not our favorite storytelling. So there's definitely that. And there were certainly moments that, broke my heart or that I didn't love. But season 8, I think just because we said the pacing of the storytelling wasn't what we wanted and the quality of the storytelling wasn't what we wanted. And yet it was still, I still liked it. I wouldn't say, I don't like it anymore. I would just say it wasn't the best one.
I'll say that once they stopped having the source material available, so I think season 5 was the last one where there's a book. Once we got to 6...
Well, part of it.
Well, correct.
Yeah, that second half was on its own.
Yeah, once we got to the point where there was no more source material and it was just going by George R.R. Martin's notes, I felt like it was just kind of a decline in overall storytelling. But season 8 would probably be my least favorite just because of the pacing. They did have some pacing issues, I think, in season 6 as well. Their first time really off book. They kind of revived it a little bit in season 7 where it was kind of like a little bit back on the upswing, but then season 8 was not as good in quality.
Yeah, I'd echo season 8. Just the pacing.
No one's disagreeing with season 8?
No, season 8, I think we've all talked about it. I think it was a very disappointing season, and I would say it's a below average season of television execution. But again, we're invested in the world. It's still an expensive television show. It's still, a decent quality television show. So I'm not sitting here and saying it's total crap, but it's definitely less than everything else. Other than that, just really quickly, there are certain things, like anything, like a big ensemble show that have got multiple storylines in multiple places. I think that, instead of just least favorite seasons or something like that, there are sometimes, I'll tell you right now, even though I have no issues with and I like the storyline of Ramsay Bolton breaking Theon Greyjoy into Reed, every time they went there, I was not happy to be there. And it's not just the graphic nature and just the horrible nature of him treating it. It's just kind of okay, we could be somewhere else.
Yeah, I've seen enough of this.
It felt gratuitous.
Yeah.
You could explain what happened without us having to watch it, and I don't know that we needed to go there.
Yeah. Or even his treatment of Sansa. That was a major controversial point at the time.
We had issues at the time with that.
So, these questions I'm about to ask you are standard looking back questions. Reflecting now, the series finale, was it a proper send-off for our characters? Why or why not?
It's a tough one to answer because I think as disappointing as season 8 was as a season, I actually didn't really have much issue with the finale. Because once Daenerys has gone bad guy and has burned down King's Landing, it felt like Jon had to kill her, which he did, and then they had to pick up and get a new king and sort of resolve King's Landing, which they did with Bran, and Bran being a different kind of leader was a good story. The fact that Arya is now on an adventure and Sansa is Queen of the North and Jon Snow's going to live in the wildlings and we've got Brienne and fun people doing things and Sam's doing things. I think it was the finale episode did all right by our characters and everything like that. I don't necessarily have an issue with how the final episode ended things. I just have issues with how they told the final sort of stories.
How they got there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as Kylie said, if this was based on War of the Roses, so we're looking at outcomes for the British throne, we now have more of a representative monarchy and more of a council, which is where we ended up. So we're ending up somewhere similar. I mean, the only thing I could argue is giving the North its own thing would be Scottish independence, which I think some Scottish people would really like. So that's a constant debate for them. So it's almost like I don't know if that's his little dig or what, but it's believable within the sort of inspiration for what he wrote. And so it's it feels like maybe that's a natural progression if we're going to get away from everybody always scrapping and fighting and killing each other over this thing and we want to try and find peace, then having a group of people instead of one person, then that allows for a larger number of people who want power to have power, and that's going to lead to more peaceful outcome than if it's just scrambling for one. So I guess it wraps that bit up. And I agree, Dany, if she's going to go on rampages and the only thing she knows how to do is just destroy everything, she's got to go if it's going to be looking for a brighter future. Otherwise, everybody's dead, and then what's the point?
Lots of nodding.
Yeah.
So you'd say you agree with these takes?
I do. I don't really have anything else new to add that we haven't discussed in this one or in the previous season 8 episode.
I mean, I think I like the series finale, given where we were. And I think that's really just what we're talking about. It was proper for where we were.
I would say I feel better during this podcast episode about the ending versus how I felt at the beginning of the last one. I think just hearing from you guys, like how the wheel was broken and, you know, in the end, you know, things kind of, they ended up how they were supposed to, just not how I had envisioned them. And feeling, you know, like Jon Snow kind of got shrift in the end. But I do feel more, I don't know, I feel better about how they ended things versus, I think, my emotional reaction at first. So, thanks guys. Thanks for coming back. I feel like I'm in a much better place now.
Podcasting is therapy.
Who knew that dragons had such a sense of symbolism, you know?
Listen, they are majestic creatures.
Especially in this show.
Very intelligent.
I mean, I have to say the visual effects were state of the art. I'm glad they spent the money on them. They were awesome. It was a very pretty ugly, you know, there were uglinesses, but it was a pretty show from the standpoint of cinematography, visual effects, art direction.
Oh my! The locations that they found, the real world locations that they just enhanced, were beautiful on their own.
I mean, from a technical standpoint, from a production side standpoint, from an acting standpoint, nobody has ever once in this, either in last episode, any of our previous episodes, or today, suggested that any of the actors fell on their face.
No, I think they were incredibly believable, which is why we have such strong, passionate reactions to the things that happen. We're invested in this world. We believe it's real. You know, like when we're in it, and you're never like, oh no, this is just, you know, fake and whatever, like, which you sometimes do with stories if the acting isn't good. Like, you believe that they believe they are who they are. Which is all you can really ask from an actor.
If you haven't, they did do a couple of brief interviews with, Amelia Clark did the press junket circuit. I highly recommend going back and watching her post-Thrones, post-finale interviews, because she's really funny when she tells the story of learning about Daenerys' fate, because she was as surprised as the rest of us, but also kind of excited by it, which could make you feel better too. So, do you think the show would hold up with the passage of time? Why or why not? Was it time for it to go? Would you have watched more seasons? Should it have ended sooner?
I'd say it holds up. It definitely stands on its own. As we've said multiple times, whether it's cinematography, costumes, acting, I mean, it's high quality television. I don't think there's anything ever been like it. I'm sure it may exceed at some point, but yeah, it's high quality television that we got to enjoy.
Yeah, there's really nothing about the show to date it, like things that are set in the quote-unquote real world. The only thing that may be a detriment later on is if the CGI and the visual effects continue to improve over the next 10-20 years, then it may look a little of its time, but I don't think that's going to diminish the rewatchability of it. If we were to go back to it in 5 or 10 years, I think I'd still enjoy it.
There's probably lots of things that you get missed because there's a lot of details in there, but I think the show is very, you know, as we talked about how complex and all that sort of stuff, it's pretty straightforward as far as each episode goes. And a lot of the episodes, you know, have surprises to them, especially if you didn't read the books, right? Like, you know, Ned Stark, the Red Wedding, you know, and I think that there is a rewatchability or replay factor with it, but I don't know if the rewatchability is as high as other shows, but I don't necessarily think that's a knock on it or anything like that. It was what it was, and I think that it's forever going to be known as sort of the standard bearer for a fantasy television show for the foreseeable future, and I think that it'll always be that way.
They're always trying to find the next Game of Thrones.
As they were trying to find the next Lost for a while.
Correct.
Which is a fantasy, sort of.
I feel like this show really just raised the bar for TV in general. Like, there'd been nothing like it. The amount of money that they spent on the episodes and everything that went into the show definitely raised the bar for TV.
And to me, to see like all my coworkers who I would not consider, I have coworkers that are very into fantasy. I'm an English teacher, so you know some of us are some real nerds. But then there were the coworkers that I would not have guessed would be into a story like this. And all those people were also invested. And I think it came at the right time where like nerd culture things were becoming more acceptable anyway. But I think this just sucks it in more. You know, in the season 8 podcast, I made reference to another series I'd love to see of very old books come to life, but like there would have never been a market for that beforehand. But I think maybe people might be willing to spend time there if it was done on the same level, because you still had the very human intrigue and things like that those of us who like fantasy know can be possible, but other people weren't willing to step into. And now I think they're more willing to step into that type of world, and I think we've had enough, you know, like we had the Harry Potter world and we had this, like we have some things that maybe people go, oh, you can have a really great storytelling in a fantasy world and not everything has to be realistic for me to enjoy it. Yeah. And so I think it's important in that way, just like the Harry Potter was, where shoot, there's a whole theme park for that now. You know, like,
can you imagine a Game of Thrones theme park?
Oh God, I wouldn't want to go.
It would be like
live.
Well, it could be like, you know, a horror attraction meets
Do I
theme park.
get to ride a dragon? I'm in. I will drop $80 for a day riding a dragon.
Horror. I mean,
there's a little of both in Game of Thrones.
Just a little.
I don't know if they could get the financial backing.
Well, I agree with the raising the bar in the sense of, you know, I always, and I could be very wrong, and, you know, people can disagree with me, but I feel like The Sopranos back in the day sort of showed us that a television show can tell a gripping story over a longer form than a movie can, but also have like cinema type quality of, you know, production and acting and cinematography and things like that. And, you know, shows have come out since The Sopranos that sort of are like, yes, we can do this in this world, or we can do it with this story. And I think Game of Thrones was sort of the first one where we're like, we can do this in the fantasy world, in the fantasy genre. And as Amanda said, other books, you know, can possibly be told now where maybe it was like, there's no way I'm going to put any money into that. I mean, as we are talking, there's The Witcher on Netflix, which is, you know, a very popular series in and of itself. And it's like, there's no way that gets made if Game of Thrones is not as popular.
Yep. Absolutely.
Kind of paved the way.
Yep.
Yeah. But Game of Thrones also did a really good job of being that cross-genre type of show. It not only appealed to people who love fantasy, like Amanda said, but people outside of that genre too. It had a little bit for everybody.
It's like the Star Wars of...
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Star Wars is not sci-fi so much as like fantasy space, but like it's space. It's like, oh, we can do space guys and spaceships, and it's Star Wars is just, it's just culture now. It's just, it's out there, and it's like Game of Thrones sort of did that with Lord of the Ringsy type things.
But it makes people more open to other things in the genre.
I think, I agree. I think it's absolutely going to hold up because Jay said it. It's kind of, when Chelsea said it too, it's raised the bar. This is going to be the model that people come back to now. Every time a fantasy adaptation, by the way, there is a Lord of the Rings TV show coming to Amazon Prime. So there's,
which doesn't get made if this isn't there.
Correct, exactly. And everybody's going to compare it to how well done Game of Thrones was. And as Kristen said, there's nothing to date it. I mean, this is the type of show that you could easily come back to, that more people are going to discover, and they're going to have opinions about. There's probably some stragglers, and I know several of them who've said, I'm going to wait till the show ends because I've waited all this time and I might as well. And then they're going to start watching it, and then they're going to have the feelings, and then we're going to be like, we told you so, but now you don't get the benefit of global commiseration. So it's fine, but it's gonna hold up because of the quality, of the fact, everything that everybody has said. People are gonna look back to this show as this was the mark. Now you can only get better or you can fail by this mark, regardless of season 8's various qualities.
But I think that factors into the season 8, like the disappointment we talk of, is because of the raising of the bar, the mark that they set. You know, the expectation that we had, you know, this is why we can't have nice things, right? Because everyone wants to be satisfied 100% with how it ends, and, you know, they raise the bar and then fall a little short. Like, in a whole way.
More people know the story behind how all this was made, and, you know, you probably know, and I don't know as much, but, you know, it's that whole ever-present struggle where, like, a lot of British shows that we sort of espouse is because, you know, they're like, I have a show, it is this long, and this is what it's going to be. And BBC says, okay, do it. Whereas like in America, you make a show and then it gets, like Friends or something like that, and then it gets popular and they're like, you are going to do this until the end of
Keep
time.
churning it out.
And they're like, okay, but now we're out of ideas. I don't care, keep making shows, and then it becomes you need to keep going. And
that was the Orange is the New Black problem.
Yeah, and sometimes I respect, when other shows kind of just say, this is how long it is and this is what it is. And then we as consumers can then just take it or leave it. Like it's an 18 episode show, or it's a 4-season show, or it's this, and we're done. That's it.
Which then goes into the question you didn't answer. Was it time for it to go? Would you have watched more seasons, or should it have ended sooner?
So I think that my answer to that is...
And by you, I meant the collective you.
It's okay, Jay will answer.
I think that for what we had, it should have ended. And maybe it should have, it was time to be done. But I think we all said that they needed more time to do the ending. So my answer is they should have ended it. At the same time, they probably needed more seasons to tell that ending properly.
Sure.
So...
Well, the decision the last 2 seasons to have not the full 10-episode runs that they had for the entire series, to then, okay, now we're doing 7 episodes, we're doing 6 episodes. It'll be a little bit longer format, but I don't know.
I think if they had
Just
stuck to their 10 episodes,
right.
they could have done it more justice. But
Absolutely.
as Kylie said, maybe they were tired and they didn't feel like they had it in them. But
That's the mantra I've been singing.
yeah,
After season 8, they should have just done 10 episodes every season.
and it would have been, I think, they could have gotten where they needed to go more effectively.
And it would have made HBO happy because they want them to go on to the end of time, like
Yeah,
Jay was
right.
saying.
Yep.
And it would have been a compromise for their own fatigue, which is clearly evident. You can even you hear it when you watch their... I don't know if you watch the after clips when you watch
Yeah.
the episodes. There was almost fatigue in those interviews, them kind of talking about the decisions they made and that sort of thing. It didn't sound, to me, hubrisy as much as it sounded like this is what we've decided and, we're just going for the end, la 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 la. So, I agree. It should have still been 8 seasons. It should have just been 80 episodes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I didn't need anything beyond what they gave us. I just needed the last little bit to be told more effectively.
And
I think
seasons 6 through 8, although 7 was very good, 6 through 8, they needed to reconfigure the pacing and spread out the story in a way that paid off what we saw in the end, or figure out a way to, if not do it over the course of the episodes, at least maximize the potential of the episodes they did order, which I felt like wasn't necessarily the case, which we talked about in our season 8 talk.
Yeah, because realistically, if they would have evened out the pacing between 6 and 8, they wouldn't have had to create more content necessarily, more scripts or filler. Just that could have taken care of so much of their problems.
Game of Thrones was created by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, as the intro has noted, and we've talked about them. It's funny because I'm going to ask you this question. So this is a typical looking back question. This is both producers' first TV creation credit, if you can believe it. And they've done very little writing on an individual basis for shows up until this point. Now, they were originally tasked to create a TV show for HBO that was about the Confederacy and the Civil War. That has since been torpedoed to death, so it's done. They do not currently have a project on tap, but if they were to create something else apart from that project, which is dead, would you watch it? Why or why not?
Do they have the full story?
Do they have something they can adapt that's complete?
Right. Or is it going to be an original? Like that's, I don't know. My standard answer for this is it's not necessarily about the creators. It's about what the content is. They did a fantastic job for their first outing, and what a monstrous first outing it was for them. So I give them, a lot of praise for that. But just because their name is attached to it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to enjoy it. So it's just as much about content.
Let's make the analogy. Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson was a film director before Lord of the Rings, but he made a lot of, B-level horror movies.
He sure
He made
did.
The Feebles, The Frighteners, and things like that. And people who are the horror genre like Peter Jackson, but it's a very different kind of movie, and, to basically see him win Oscars for The Lord of the Rings, and then you see some of his horror works, you would basically say, are they the same person? And the answer is yes, there's some of that Peter Jackson stuff in The Lord of the Rings, but that's the whole thing. Peter Jackson's making a new thing. Would you watch it? Well, what is it? It's not an automatic this or that. I think that Kristen's exactly right. It's what's the content? What are they doing? So, like, if Benioff and Weiss were doing something new, I mean, I wouldn't automatically say, yes, I'm on board because I trust them, but I wouldn't also say, I absolutely not, I won't. It's just, what is it?
Well, I'm going to continue this Peter Jackson metaphor.
Hey.
Since he is also responsible for the Hobbit trilogy,
right.
Which A, should have never been a trilogy, and B, was not a good trilogy, and C, even though it had elements of what made Lord of the Rings great, it was basically a 150-page novel stretched out over 9 hours.
But by that same token, you can see, in the sense that I think we all had that thing where we, those of us who loved the Lord of the Rings movie, they're like, Peter Jackson's making The Hobbit. And
I showed up.
We all went, I'm in.
Yeah, I'm
absolutely.
There. I like The Hobbit too.
They were good, so like, lesson learned. So you're like, Benioff and Weiss are making a new show. Okay, what is it? Yeah.
And sometimes people just have one great thing in them. I think of Harper Lee, who, she didn't want to write another story, and they released Go Set a Watchman, which, by the way, was the first draft to Kill a Mockingbird, and never should have been released, because it wasn't nearly as good, which is why it wasn't published. But, everybody was like, oh, yes, because we love this one thing that she did. I don't necessarily believe that you made one great thing, you're going to make another. But I wouldn't not watch. If it intrigued me, like if they made something about the Confederacy, I'd be like, nah. And I'm a history major, but nah, because I'm not interested in the Confederacy in any way, shape, or form. They were wrong. So, I don't want to watch that. But, so that's not interesting to me, which is probably why it got scrapped, because everybody was like, no. But if they had something that they were going to make, I wouldn't say, oh, well, they screwed up the end of this show, and so I'm not going to watch. I would be interested to see what they did after maybe they've had a break, because if they are tired, burnout's for real. And creative burnout is that way. It's part of the reason why we don't have the end of the novels, I think, is because at a certain point, creating in that sort of constant churning, you have to do this and hit a deadline, is exhausting, and it's stifling for the process. So if they, I think, had a complete text that they were going to work from, they could do it more justice than when they got into these nebulous times of we have the overall arc but not it completely fleshed out, because I don't know that that's as strong a suit for them as bringing the existing story to life. So it would depend on the project.
Yeah, it's amazing how much public perception of the two of them has changed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
They were almost deities the way that they were presenting this story, and then the last couple seasons this really starts to question. But yeah, I'd agree, it depend on the content, the story.
I'd agree with that too, but I also, I don't know, feel like they've kind of broken my trust a little bit because of how amazing the series started out, and just the fact that didn't feel like they cared as much at the end there. I agree, creative burnout is a real thing, and I'm sure on this scale it's even harder to try to work through that. But from a fan perspective, are they going to create this another amazing world and just kind of peter out at the end? So that is kind of a concern for me, as brilliant as they are and as brilliant as this show was, that just feeling slightly unsatisfied at the end.
And just to really quickly just to do another analogy, one of my favorite television series of all time is The Wire by David Simon. David Simon I respect so much. I love Homicide. He has a show, I don't even know if it's still continuing, but it's a show on HBO, The Deuce, which is a show about like the 70s, 80s, Times Square, early pornography stuff in New York. And it's like, Amanda and I started to watch it and we stopped. And it wasn't because the show was bad or poorly written or poorly acted. It was all of those things that was great. It was just, subject matter didn't really grip us. And we were just kind of like, do you want to watch the next one? Nah, I'm okay. And we sort of stopped, but it doesn't make me say David Simon failed or David Simon's terrible. It's just, we didn't like that one. We're not watching it, and that's okay. It can still be great.
I asked this question. I know I get that answer from Kristen a lot, but you are on a lot of our panels.
Yeah.
So I'm going to caution that with a disclaimer. The reason why is because I do think there are different people that respond to creators differently. I am somebody that cares about the creator. If you told me that Joss Whedon was planning to release something tomorrow, I'm there. I don't care what the hell it is. I'm going to watch it. J.J. Abrams, same thing. There are certain people who, and trust is the word, I smirked because they've earned trust, right? Are all of Joss Whedon's things just absolutely perfect? Arguably no, but I indubitably enjoy everything he's ever created, and I've watched them all repeatedly. Buffy, Angel, Firefly, Dollhouse, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on a co-creator credit. Yes, I've liked all of those shows. He's earned it. You know, personal life and controversy and everything aside, if Joss Whedon wrote something and said, I'm going to put this on TV tomorrow, I would say, sign me up. What channel is it on? What time is it on? I'm there. The Duffer Brothers is another example. So they've only got one creator credit. That's Stranger Things. I love that show. And they're so unique in their presentation that if somebody told me the Duffer Brothers was making something else, I'd want to check it out just to see what they do with it. Because chances are, if the story's told well, even if it's not subject matter that I might not necessarily identify with, if they're telling me a story that can pull me into it and along for the ride, I'll follow it. That being said, David and DB, as good of a job as they did on this show, have sort of the same problem that the Lost creators have, in the sense that they didn't stick the landing. And it is a massive undertaking to create a fantasy zeitgeist that the whole world kind of falls in love with, and then you have to sort of live up to that pressure, I guess. You have to sort of find something that repeats that success, or maybe you decide to go quietly and pick something smaller to create for your art. I don't know, but I would personally be hesitant about them in the future. The Confederacy thing was very problematic to me from the beginning. That's legit, and I'm along for that argument as well. But, you know, if somebody told me that David and DB were making anything, I don't know that I would actually watch it unless somebody, again, like Game of Thrones, said, this is something you would like, because I'd be like, well, is it going to be like Game of Thrones? Because I loved Game of Thrones, but I don't know if I could live through that again a little bit. You know, there was a lot of obsession, a little bit of disappointment. I still love it. It's still going to be my favorite. Lost is in some ways still one of my favorites. But is it something that I want to do again? In a different context? Does it matter what the context is? No. Because storytellers tend to find a style and stick with it, especially on TV. And I can point to a lot of examples. And we talked about Genji Go. I keep going to Orange is the New Black because we have two panelists. And this is a very echoey conversation. Genji Cohan is the creator of that. She also created Weeds. And the whole panel said, this is just like how Weeds went.
Weeds did kind of go off the rails, didn't it?
Yeah!
It really did.
And if you think about... Yeah, and if you think about Ryan Murphy, with the exception of American Horror Story, a lot of his things kind of do the same thing. And American Horror Story is very up and down if you watch that show. So I do think there are patterns to how people choose to market their story and map their story. TV is a different way to tell stories. That's why we have this podcast, because there is so much more that they have to kind of put into the puzzle and make work. And I don't know that David and DB could strike lightning twice, is basically what I'm saying. I don't think they have it in them, especially after this. That's where I'm at. But I do follow creators, like I said. If Joss said something, I'd do it. So, would you follow any of the individual ensemble actors? And there are like 1,000. And normally I list some of their example projects. Several of them have already got things underway. Emilia Clarke has been in movies. Jon Snow's going to be in Marvel. You know, what's his real name? Kit Harington is going to be in a Marvel movie. I mean, they've all got things in the pipeline because of the success of this show. Would you follow them to anything, new TV or project, because of their work on Game of Thrones? Why or why not?
I have already. I've seen Emilia Clarke's movies, which are very cute and funny. And then also, is it Natalie Emmanuel, who played Missandei? I watched the Hulu limited series for Weddings and a Funeral, and it was kind of because, oh, she's in it, but also it's Mindy Kaling. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her performance on Game of Thrones, and I really enjoyed her performance in the reimagining of Four Weddings and a Funeral. So I'm a Marvel fan, so I'm going to go check out Kit Harington and The Eternals, because that's what I do. But yeah, so far so good. Even Rob Stark was in a couple movies, and
he won like a Golden Globe.
Yeah,
for The Bodyguard, which is a Netflix
which is
series.
Fantastic.
I watched that too.
Yeah, well, again, because I knew him, and I knew that he's a really good performer.
Yeah, that was the reason why I clicked on that one.
Same. Yeah, I'm more likely
to
to
follow.
Rob. Yeah, I'm more likely to follow a really good actor who picks their projects well than I am a creator.
And that's kind of what I was going to say, is that a lot of times these HBO series or things that happen pick actors. Some of them, like Peter Dinklage, has done stuff before Game of Thrones, and then he's just, you know, a big gun that comes into the show. But a lot of these young people, like Emilia Clarke and whatnot, they come in, they're relative-ish unknowns, and they get in this show that becomes super great, and they become something. And even less than Game of Thrones, I always think of the miniseries of HBO's Band of Brothers. You know, and you look back at that cast in Band of Brothers, like Damian Lewis and people like that, like they are just phenomenal actors. But not only are they just phenomenal actors, they pick projects well. And so it's not a matter of like, I'm going to go follow an actor, but sometimes it's again a trust thing where like an actor just picks projects well. One of which is Pedro Pascal.
Oh, yeah.
Who, you know, he was in Narcos, which was unbelievable, and now he's the Mandalorian, for crying out loud. Dude picks his projects well, you know. Good on you, son.
Once he got his face smashed, he went on to bigger and better things.
He sure did. And he's just killing it in The Mandalorian.
Yep.
I would follow the actors. I love Kit Harington. He's dreamy.
Right.
I tend to follow dreamy boys to other things.
Well, it's not even following, but again, with things with Dreamy Boys, Dreamy Girls, Natalie Dormer.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
she was Anne Boleyn in The Tudors before this, you know. If you haven't checked that out, check it out. She's
great.
It's good B-level
like
stuff.
her.
It's fantastic. Like, she does that super well.
And she is going to be in the new Penny Dreadful.
Oh.
She's the lead in that.
She's the lead in that.
Yeah.
So if you're a Penny
the stills
Dreadful,
look awesome.
Yeah, if you're a Penny Dreadful, I've already had a request for that. Like, oh my God, Penny Dreadful's coming back, and she's in it. So that's watch that one. But yeah, I follow the people. I have 3 final questions. So the first question is, apart from Amanda and Jay, because you already have done so, given watching Game of Thrones, the show, would you read Game of Thrones, the novels?
I think I would, especially if the outcome, the ending might be slightly different.
Assuming he finishes it.
Correct, yeah. You know, you always wonder, apparently he's a big football fan, so he only writes in the off-season, and I don't know if it ever does get finished, but...
It's only 6 months.
Yeah, I'd give it a shot. I know they're lengthy. I would definitely read them.
I'm not going to go out and read them like tomorrow or anything, but I think somewhere along the line I'm going to be interested in, you know, wanting to know how he ties things up, and just to read it, to really kind of fully appreciate what his full scope was, what the full story was, and just to kind of see what they left out and all of that. And if the characters on the screen end up being the characters that I see from reading the book. But yeah, I think eventually I'll rewatch the entire series, and I think before I do that I will read all of the books.
That is in fact my plan. I actually bought the books with the intention of reading them as I started to watch the show. Except I think I was a couple seasons in. So when I started to read Game of Thrones, the novel, I realized that it was very close to Game of Thrones season 1. And I was like, maybe I don't want to do this right now because this feels super repetitive where I'm sitting. So maybe I want to get through the end and go back and visit the books and then revisit the show. So that is my plan. Golly gee, George R.R. Martin, if you would please... appease the people and finish the damn books.
He's not listening.
No.
It doesn't matter what the ending is, just write them.
He promised they're coming out, but I will believe it when I see it.
He's been promising that for like a decade.
I didn't think the show would ever overtake me. Well, really? How long have you been working on the last 2?
It takes him years in between each book. He's very perfectionistic.
He is. So I think that's why I'm going to wait till everything is released. Then I'll reread book 1 since that's the only one I've read, and then I'll continue on from there.
That would be my advice, is if you're going to read the books, really, truly, why until he's finished it.
Right. And if he dies before he gets to finish it, I really hope he leaves some very detailed notes for the ghostwriter or whatever to finish it on his behalf.
Shares the password.
Because you know somebody will.
They have to.
In this day and age.
It's going to be too much of a moneymaker if they don't release them at this point. They're going to miss out on millions of dollars.
Well, I hope you do it soon because while I can wait to rewatch the series, there is going to be that need for me to go back and rewatch this series, especially with all of our talk about the final season. I'm going to want to go back and personally map and see where since I was so blind with my love and obsession, where did they really fall off the cliff? Because I don't think it was necessarily right in the last season. I don't know if it was the book breaking point or some other point, but I have a need to do that. And it's one of my favorite shows. I usually rewatch those at least once. That's the first question. The second question, as Kristen has alluded to, there is a prequel series, potentially coming to HBO about the dynasty of House Targaryen. Will you watch it?
Maybe.
I'll check it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's going to be dragons, right?
Yeah.
And there are going to be a lot of dragons.
I think we covered this. This might be one that, like, if Jay watches a few and is like, nah, then I'll watch it when he's not home, because I think I'll watch anything, even if it's stupid, with dragons in it, because I'm that nerd.
I like House Targaryen's potential history. I think there's a lot of story to mine there. And yes, dragons. I will watch it.
Yep, and it is based on pieces that he's already written, so there's a map. Let's just hope that
And
it's
it's
a good
not
one.
these two guys doing it.
It's not. It's
somebody
someone
else.
totally different.
Okay.
But they have a feel that they can work with of what the world is like from this, so hopefully they'll stay. It won't be too crazy different, but
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the familiar things that we're used to visually pop up in this new one, because they already created such a great world that that the Targaryens built. So I'm sure we'll see the Iron Throne, even the throne room in some way, shape, or
some of
form.
this being created,
Absolutely.
for sure.
It's like the Silmarillion, but less textbooky like. And more dragons.
All the dragons.
Yeah. So here's the $1 million question. I forego this for the penultimate, but it's back. You've watched all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. Would you recommend it to others? Why or why not?
Yes. Yes, I would. I absolutely would. Even, warts and all, and even bad ending and all. I mean, show's good on the whole. We've talked about, just the level of acting, the level of production, the level of care, and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it falls off near the end, but it's still too good not to watch.
Agreed.
Yes.
100%.
Yes, definitely.
Everything Jay said and more.
Yes. Yep.
I don't think it's a waste of your life
No.
to watch
Absolutely
this
not.
at all.
No way.
And I think that you'll even walk away from it with complex but ultimately mostly satisfied feelings.
Yeah. If nothing else, just because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a gorgeously shot show.
And there's nothing like it.
Nope.
And dragons aren't nerdy things. You can like dragons and not call yourself a nerd.
I'm just a nerd.
Self-actualize. Find your identity and be okay.
Oh no, I'm okay with being a nerd.
No, I know you are.
Okay.
As am I.
All right.
I'm talking to the people who might say, dragons? Isn't that like a nerdy thing? It doesn't have to be. They burninate the countryside, as you will figure out. We've looked back at Game of Thrones, so now, is there anything else that you haven't got off your chest, or any button you'd like to put on your Game of Thrones experience?
No.
You've done catharsis, now you're going to cathart? Yes.
We're all gonna go hold the door now.
Oh no! I just was avoiding talking about it, Jay.
Too soon.
It will forever be too soon for me on that one. That was one of the most heartbreaking things ever, and I don't want to talk about it anymore.
And he's he's a very nice guy, and he goes to a lot of conventions. So if you ever meet him, he's happy to talk and cry with you about the untimely passing of Hodor.
It was timely. It helped.
Yeah.
It helped.
Sacrifice
It was a
himself.
sacrifice.
It was a sacrifice, yeah.
It was very noble.
It was.
We love him. Hodor.
So I'm trying to improv a way out of that. Aww.
I don't know if you can.
No, it's fine.
Just hard segue.
I guess. So since we've held the door
And our watch has ended.
and our watch has ended and we've played the game without dying, what I'd like to do is thank, for the final and most gratified time, Rob, Chelsea, Kristen, Jay, and Amanda for talking with me about one of my all-time favorite shows, Game of Thrones. And because we've done that and we've had our feels, it's now time for the less feeling credits. Couch Potatoes Unite! Exclamation point was produced by Back Pocket Productions, run by yours truly, the Chief Couch Potato, which is really another way of saying executively produced by me, Kylie Piette. My associate producers are Krista Pennington and Selene Rezmer. I edit this podcast, and our logo is by Rebecca Wallace. Our marketing graphic artist is Krista. Our theme song was written by Sarah Milbratz and sung by Sarah, Amy McDaniel, and Kelsey Rezmer. Kelsey played the keyboard, Ian McDonough played the bass, Christian Somerville played the guitar, and the whole kit and caboodle was engineered and produced by Kyle Aspinall and Christian. We hail from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Please, if you like what you hear, take the time to rate us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Give us stars, give us comments, give us reviews. Let us know how we're doing. Send us a message. We might just read it on the podcast. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, what we should keep, what we should toss. You know how it goes. And if you have suggestions on shows we might consider, contact us at our website, couchpotatoesunite.wordpress.com, where we have a guest book, via email at couchpotatoesunitepodcast@gmail.com, or via our social media, Facebook, Twitter at CPU Podcast, and Instagram at Couch Potatoes Unite. Though, of course, we add new and old shows to chat about around the water cooler all the time. We always have several more new episodes coming down the pike. Just listen to our intros. And if you miss old episodes or want to know in general what we cover, just find us. We are everywhere and searchable wherever you look for things on the internet. You can search for us, or you can subscribe at our website, our channels, our social media accounts. Stay up on our new events and episodes. Until the next time, all Game of Thrones is available to stream at HBO Go or HBO Max. But our coverage of Game of Thrones as a panel is now officially come to a close, though I wouldn't be surprised if it cropped up in other discussions from time to time, as it often does. If you have nominations for shows we should cover on our podcast, contact us via social media or email. You can also volunteer to be a panelist too. In the meantime, and until next time, until next episode, new episodes are published every Wednesday. Keep listening, keep watching, stay tuned.
Bye.